Hey everybody, Eric Rennie here with Philippe J. Fournier for this week's episode of The Numbers. Philippe, how you doing these days?
Good morning, Eric. Busy January led into a very tumultuous February, I think we can say, a start of February. Lots of polls, lots of movement, it seems, Eric. Is something happening? I think we have to discuss this. But okay, so where do you want to start today? Because there's choice. We have options here.
We definitely do. We will get to the Ontario election, but I think first we do have to discuss some federal stuff.
Oh yeah.
Shockingly enough, since the last time we spoke, there were tariffs, and then there weren't tariffs.
Yes, that's right.
And so that it was a lot. It was a big week. It was things have been happening, and as you mentioned. We are getting some indication in the polls that it is having an impact on voting intentions, on people's views of where things stand nationwide. Now, in terms of the voting intentions polls that we've had over the last week, we don't have much at the national level. All we have is a Nanos poll that came out, and it showed not too much change from the week before, 42 for the Conservatives, 26 for the Liberals, 17 for the NDP. And remember that this is a 4-week rolling poll, so it includes data now that is, I think it's all post-Trudeau resignation, or at least almost all post-Trudeau resignation.
It is, from January 10th to 31st. That's right.
There you go. So, we're at least starting to get some more recent data, but the trend line is continuing in the way of a closer margin. And then Thursday morning.
Yeah.
Not a lot of our listeners and viewers might get the Journal de Montréal in their mailboxes on their front steps, but they had some shocking numbers. Some shocking numbers out of Quebec. What did they show?
Okay, so Léger, Quebec-only poll. So this is a large sample, 1,000, only in Quebec. And on Wednesday night, the voting intentions provincially leaked. But I figured, okay, that's strange. Usually they keep the good stuff for the Thursday morning. And you know what, Eric? They did keep the good stuff because it was federal numbers that were the most interesting. So Léger tested, of course, voting intentions as a generic ballot with Justin Trudeau on the questionnaire. And then they tested Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland, the two frontrunners of the Liberal leadership race. So with Trudeau there, 29 Liberal, 29 Bloc Québécois, and 24 Conservatives. If we compare that to Léger's poll 2 weeks ago, that was leaked by the Bloc, and which fell very close to the current averages in Quebec. This is an 8-point jump for the Liberals and an 8-point slide for the Bloc Québécois, and the Conservatives remain mostly stable. So for a Quebec-only poll, for a large sample, this is significant movement. Is it a sugar high or is it a new trend? I'm not sure. But that was something. And so the uncertainty right now, the conflict with the Trump administration and, the tariffs, it seems to have an effect, at least in Quebec. And it changes the race right now. That's the main numbers with Trudeau. We're going to talk about the Carney and Freeland numbers, but Eric, your first impressions when you see these numbers?
Well, there's two things that are pretty big about it. We have seen for a long time now, for at least a few months, that the consensus in the polls in Quebec is that the Conservatives are in second place and the Liberals are in third, falling to the low 20s. Now, if you're someone from outside of Quebec and you're wondering, why should we focus this much on these regional numbers? They're a little bit of a canary in the coal mine here, because if the Liberals are rising this much in Quebec, that could have an impact on their numbers elsewhere, in the sense that the numbers might also be rising in other parts of the country, and it's going to help their overall national numbers. So the gap between them and the Conservatives nationwide is going to get smaller just with what would happen in Quebec. But 29 for the Liberals is a big jump.
Yeah.
29 for the Bloc is a big fall. When we were talking about that poll that was commissioned by the Bloc, they had them at 37%. So this is 29. And with these kinds of numbers, I mean, the Liberals are now starting to look again at, winning, 25, 30 seats in Quebec at the very least. And that helps their bottom line quite a bit. It is worth noting and I just took a look at the field dates, that this poll was between January 31st and February 2nd.
Yeah.
All right. So that includes the first kind of news that Trump was going to have the tariffs, and it includes Trudeau's kind of response, that speech that he made. So this could be very specific to what was a few good days for the Liberals. Let's put it that way, in terms of the rally around the flag effect, the response to Trump. I don't know what happens since the tariffs were paused, if that has an impact here.
Yeah.
But you got to think that I bet you I saw someone make the joke about it, but I'm sure Trudeau's looking at these numbers and saying, why did I resign? I have a shot. I could have won. A little bit like maybe Joe Biden down south, wondering if he would have had a shot if he would have stayed around.
Well, or maybe if he's rational about this, perhaps this is a way to have a more gracious exit than just being booted out with tar and feathers, right? Okay, so let me tell you this. As I said earlier, Léger tested the leadership candidate names. With Chrystia Freeland, the numbers move a tiny little bit. If Chrystia Freeland is named as Liberal leader in Quebec, 30% Liberal, 27% Bloc, and 24% Conservative. Not a big change, but notable that Chrystia Freeland at least holds her own in these numbers.
Yeah.
But then we get to Mark Carney, and those numbers were not part of the Journal de Montréal piece, but they were featured on TVA, and I bet later today the full report will be available. But if you put Mark Carney in there, 38% Liberal, 24% Bloc, 22 Conservatives. So you insert Mark Carney, who hasn't done much interviews in Quebec since the leadership began, and suddenly the Liberals jump to a 14-point lead in the province. Mark Carney hurts both the Conservatives and the Bloc Québécois in the province. And again, this is not like a 250 sample. This is 1,000 sample of Quebec from not an obscure firm, but from Léger, the A-plus firm in Canada. So we need more polling all the time to confirm trends, but this is a big one. This is a big data point. And so, yeah, I think we are into a new paradigm. We are into a new world right now. The numbers from December do not matter anymore. And so now it will, we'll have to see if the Bloc, but more importantly, if the Conservatives can find a way to navigate this, because their election plan, we know it was to attack Trudeau after the carbon tax, have a carbon tax election. Who thinks right now we're going to have a carbon tax election in this country? I think the discussion has changed. And by the way, it's just to make sure that people, thing is, I think many people would say, oh, it's probably all the Anglophones in Quebec. I have the breakdown here in front of me. I don't have the full breakdown, but with Mark Carney at the helm in Quebec, the Liberals get to 33% among Francophones. And so this is a huge number. 33% among Francophones, this is the peak of the Trudeau years during the pandemic. And with this, the Liberals would salvage some seats in Francophone Quebec, whereas if you look at the projection map right now, Eric, there are no Francophone seats for the Liberals. It's all in Montreal, Laval, and Gatineau. Of course, there are Francophones there, but purely Francophones. Yeah, I'm not sure what to make of this. This could be a sugar high, but these are still... I mean, if it had been 32, you go like, okay, that's a bit high. 38, this is a huge number. Yeah.
What kind of explains it, though? As you said, Carney hasn't given a lot of interviews, particularly in French. His French is still not that... I mean, it's not... He speaks French, but it's not by any means, sounds like a local, to put it lightly.
Yeah. That's fair.
So how much of this is real? I think that is my question here.
Yeah.
You often see when you have hypothetical leaders put into polls that they sometimes do really well in those polls. They don't always match it once they actually get in there, because the idea of Mark Carney, especially for a lot of Quebecers who probably, I would imagine, know him a lot less than the rest of the country, who even them don't know him that much, might have an idea of Mark Carney, and will he actually live up to that idea that they're creating it in their heads? The amount of people who would give him the support, 38%. We haven't seen numbers for the Liberals at 38%. I can't remember the last time we saw a number this high for the Liberals.
I can tell you, I looked it up. So we had punctual numbers in the high 30s in 2023 before the Liberals fell. But sustained numbers at that level, it's the summer of 2020, during the pandemic sugar high for the Liberals.
So is this just one poll out of Quebec with a hypothetical kind of leader, or are we going to see more of this kind of stuff? We haven't seen a lot of polls done with hypothetical leaders, with names put in place of Justin Trudeau. So we don't have a lot of numbers to kind of compare this to.
Yeah.
We have seen from Main Street Research, they've been doing their polling of the Ontario provincial campaign, releasing some federal numbers as well for Ontario. And unlike what they do, unlike what you see with a lot of these polls, they, instead of saying Justin Trudeau's Liberals, they say the Liberals under a new leader, right? So then you get to put in whoever you like. And those numbers have been also quite good for the Liberals in Ontario.
Yeah.
So the idea of Mark Carney or the idea of having just someone else in place as leader of the Liberals boost the Liberals by quite a bit. And I'm very curious to see what's going to happen as we get closer to the leadership vote, when people will probably see him a bit more. And also, do they just go right away? Like if we see a few more polls with the Liberals in the mid to high 30s in Quebec, that probably means they're doing pretty well in other parts of the country too.
Yeah.
Mark Carney, if he wins the leadership on March 9th, drop on March 10th, like, do you even risk that the sugar high will dissipate for a week or two?
Okay, many things. First, so Mark Carney hasn't done much interviews in French, or at all, basically. He went to international and American news mostly. But I'll push back here on this. It's still the leadership race. This guy is not prime minister or running in a general election yet. He's running to be the leader of the Liberals. So I'm not offended by that so far. It's a short race, so I don't mind it for now, and it seems to be working. So if you don't do much interviews and the numbers are high, maybe you shouldn't do much interviews. Now, of course, I want political leaders in this country to be transparent, and I want them to be available to the media. But I think this could come in time. If he still doesn't talk to the media and the French media, if he becomes prime minister next month, now that's another story. But the second thing is also, the Bloc Québécois, I didn't see the Bloc Québécois attack Mark Carney that much, right? And if they see these numbers this morning, and they are confirmed in subsequent polls, Mark Carney hurts the Bloc in Quebec. And so suddenly the Bloc Québécois, which were rightfully very confident going into 2025, projecting 45, 47, 48 seats, maybe 50 in Quebec, those numbers, you would suffer losses from 2021 if those numbers sustained. So, and we add that to, let's go to the Main Street thing. Main Street polls with new leader instead of not naming a leader, right? They could just choose to go with party brands. Does that skew the result? It's entirely possible that it does. I've spoken with many pollsters this week who see this. It's not that it's biased as much as that you measure something else. If you put in a new leader, again, everybody who's tempted to vote Liberals will think of their favorite possible leader, generic favorite Liberal. But does it skew it by 15 points? Because this is what we're seeing, right? In the Main Street polling, again, it's daily. It's a big sample. It's usually around 1,200 people, so it's a 3-day rolling poll, and it's been sustained since the Ontario election began, and even the Liberal lead grew. Now, I think this morning, if you take decided voters from Main Street, I think it's 43% for the Liberals in Ontario. Eric, if the Liberals next month lead in Quebec and are at least tied in Ontario, this is a whole new race. Like we have to completely erase all our analysis from 2024, and our over/unders, of course, are down the drain, right? But this is a whole new race. I did not expect this at all. I'm very
No.
surprised by this.
That is it. That is. I'm also kind of perplexed by this, to use a word that Trudeau used in terms of how Canadians are feeling these days.
Yeah.
38 in Quebec, 43 in Ontario. That's That's almost a Liberal majority, like in terms of being able to win the election, right?
Yeah, BC and Atlantic Canada have not. We need those two,
Yeah, but it would
it's
be
not
it
a
would be somewhat
majority.
bizarre that they would be doing that well in Ontario and Quebec and not in Atlantic Canada and BC. So
that's true.
I mean, we really do need to see some more numbers. Obviously, the ECOS numbers we had seen for a while were not being corroborated by other pollsters.
No.
But the ECOS numbers weren't testing Mark Carney, right? So it was a bit of a different situation. We can't really compare them. They're somewhat apples to oranges at this stage.
Yeah.
But could things have shifted this much? That's what my big question is, that sometimes you get these kinds of numbers from some polls that are testing new leaders that, as we mentioned with the Main Street one, just allow you to choose your ideal leader. So if you would vote for a Liberal Party under Mark Carney, if you would vote for a Liberal Party, but not one under Freeland, but if you would vote for one under Freeland but not Carney, both of those people get to say they would vote Liberal in that poll, right? So that's why it would boost it up.
But that's way too high, though. We had the Liberals in Ontario in the mid-20s.
Yeah.
So you would think that a question that lets the leadership question open, maybe 3-4 points, not 15 or 18. And this is where I'm baffled by these numbers. And so, again, just to make sure, I mean, we know we expected lots of criticism to talk about ECOS last week, and we got it. But no pollster nationally has confirmed the trends seen by ECOS. So, but locally, in Ontario and Quebec, at least, there seems to be indication that there's a great deal of tightening.
Yeah.
But so let's wait. I know ECOS and Mr. Graves will take a victory lap, and if he's right, good for him. I mean, if he maybe he saw something early, but it has not been confirmed yet that nationally, at least, the two parties are almost tied. We haven't seen that.
Yeah, so I guess that's what our view of this is that something does seem to be happening. We're not going to get overheated over a few numbers that come out that suggest that everything has changed.
Yeah.
But it does show that we need to start looking at these numbers pretty closely, because over the next few weeks, so much seems to be in flux with what has happened in the United States, with the fact that now the Liberals are going to have a new leader and the leadership race is starting to kind of penetrate a little bit, I think, that we could see lots of wild numbers, and the trend lines could be up and down, could be a bit of a roller coaster for a little while, right? Because, as we said, there is that kind of that sugar high maybe from the fact that there's a new leader coming, and who it could be and all this kind of stuff. And the Liberals maybe having a good few days in terms of the tariffs, in terms of the position that Canadians reacted, it seems pretty well to it. Is that going to actually be sustained for any longer period of time? That we don't know.
Yeah.
But the numbers out of Quebec, I find, are just why I think we're focusing on so much, is that they're surprising, and that they came from Leger is surprising.
That's right.
Leger is not a pollster that flails around with huge shifts from one poll to another. So it really shows that this is something that could be having a big impact on voting intentions, and really could make the next few months very different than what we were expecting.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. And if just to go back to the Nanos numbers for a second here, you said, okay, so the latest update from Nanos, 4-week rolling poll from January 10th to 31st. So the latest is 42 Conservatives, 26 Liberals, 17 NDP. Do you remember the numbers from 4 weeks ago? I have them right in front of me. 47 Conservative, 20 Liberal, 18 NDP. So we know that the Nanos tracker fluctuates a lot, but it sees significant movement in the same direction as other pollsters. So you have at least to give it a little more weight here. Went from a 26-point lead for the Conservatives to a 16-point lead. We'll see how the Conservatives adjust, because they do not have Parliament as their social media studio to publish their clips anymore. They have to find a way to adjust to the mood of the country, which I think soured a lot in the last 2 weeks since Trump was sworn in. And I don't think, I mean, the uncertainty and the chaos is not a bug in Trump's presidency. It's a feature. It will come back. And we had a break of the tariff talks for a month. I think that leads us just before the Liberals choose their new leader. So it will be the swan song of Justin Trudeau. So that'll be interesting to follow in the next few weeks.
Yeah, another grenade going to be thrown into the room just before those the Liberals make their choice. Okay, well, we got some other numbers that maybe are a little bit more familiar from what we've seen for the last little while, and these were the fundraising numbers for the end of the fourth quarter. We're not going to spend too much time on this because it already feels like they've become a bit out of date, but it was a sign of just how good things were going for the Conservatives at the end of the year and just how bad things were going for the Liberals. So in the last 3 months of 2024, the Conservatives raised $12.8 million in 3 months. That is the best quarter that they've ever had. It's the best quarter that any party has ever had. And it is actually more money than the NDP, the Greens, the Bloc, and the People's Party raised throughout the entire year. The Conservatives out-fundraised those four national parties in just 3 months. They've raised now $42 million for the entire year. That, again, is another record. I checked the spending limits in the last federal election. It was $30 million.
For the whole
this
campaign?
time.
For the whole campaign?
For the whole campaign, yeah.
Okay.
It'll be more this time because there's more voters, inflation. But the Conservatives raised enough money last year to run an entire election campaign.
Wow.
Without having to borrow any money, which is what the parties will likely do if they don't have enough. So the Liberals raised $5 million. That was their worst non-election fourth quarter since 2013. So that was a long time ago. They raised $15 million for the year. The NDP raised $2.4 million in the quarter, just over $6 million for the year. The Greens raised $1 million, which is actually a pretty good quarter for them. They're up to $2.2 million for the year. The Bloc was just under $1 million. They've raised $2 million. And the People's Party raised $580,000 for $1.2 million. That's down 26% from last year. So the PPC seems to be running out of steam. Any particular reaction to these fundraising numbers?
I mean, I think we've gotten numb to it. We understand that the Poilievre Conservatives are a fundraising machine that is unequal in this country. But as you said, this is the Q4 of 2024. With a leadership race and a new leader, I would be very curious to see the first quarter of 2025. But I don't expect the Conservatives to go down. They are in a permanent campaign and they're doing it very well. Yeah. So did you say is the best Q4 ever for the Conservatives or best quarter ever?
Best quarter ever, yeah.
Wow. Wow. Okay, that's interesting.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, no, they almost raised as much. There's some years not too long ago the Liberals would have raised this much in an entire year. So it just kind of shows how much they've raised. And it also, what's important, I think, about these numbers is, one, the Liberals still have to hope that the Liberal leadership race is doing some fundraising for them because they need some money. The NDP needs some money. They don't have a lot right there. $6 million for an entire year. As I mentioned, $30 million you can spend in an election campaign, at least the last time. Yeah. And that the Conservatives have just money that they can spend now. That's right. And I think that's the most important thing is that once the writ drops, the spending limits are the same for everybody. And, the parties can borrow money, which they often do, so that they can spend to the limit. But right now, if the Conservatives have an extra, $10, $20 million, they can spend it over the next 2 months before the writ drop, and it won't count against the federal election. And they can probably raise that money again very quickly, right? If they can raise $13 million at the end of a year, they can probably raise, $10 or $15 million in a run-up to a federal election, when people will be more likely to maybe open up their wallets. So just a reminder that the Conservatives have this ingrained advantage that they can use, and the other parties simply do not have it.
I imagine that there will be Carney ads for the Conservatives on the evening of March night. Like right away, just try to define the guy before he has the time to define himself. But yeah, the Conservatives, again, to their credit, they build a fundraising machine unequal. And they've been using it so far. There's a lot of ads going on, and I don't think it's going to stop this year. So
no. A couple of things. Let's talk about the Liberal leadership race. Not too much has happened over the last week. I think a lot of the focus was on the tariffs. Jaime Batista, he did drop out, so he was one of the candidates. He's the MP for Sydney Victoria. He dropped out, is endorsing Mark Carney. So there's now 5 candidates in the race. So there's Carney, Freeland, Karina Gould, Frank Baylis, and Ruby Dalla. The next big deadline is this coming Friday. We're recording on Thursday, so it's tomorrow, where you have to give in $125,000. At that point, you would have had given the party $225,000. So we'll see if any of the bottom candidates, and that might include Karina Gould, because she was putting out some appeals to raise money because they needed to raise more money to make this deadline. And we'll see if the field winnows down at all. And then we also had the news that nearly 400,000 people registered to vote in the Liberal leadership race. They're gonna whittle that number down as they weed out the fakes.
Yeah.
And then there'll be a second step where you have to register to vote. And as we saw in 2013, that number will be a lot smaller than this 400,000. Last time it was somewhere around 100, and I think it was 25 or 135,000 out of the 394,000 who actually registered to vote, and then just over 100,000 actually cast a ballot when Justin Trudeau won in 2013.
Do you think that after this cycle, the Liberals will change how they run leadership campaigns? They will change their constitution? Because, 400,000 registered, it's free, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to commit much, right? Even if they ask for, I don't know, $10, you would think that you could cash in maybe a couple of mil if you did that. But I think this is the last Liberal leadership campaign under this format. They will have to adjust. It was a good idea when the Liberals were a distant third in the House of Commons and were in complete rebuild mode. Not sure they will have to adjust. Let's just leave it at that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, also 2013 was a very different time when it comes to foreign interference and the ability to kind of game systems online and this kind of stuff. And just what you mentioned, the Conservatives had 675,000 members in that leadership race, but they all paid. It was like $5 or $10 to be a member, right? So that was a lot of money. That was a lot of money that the Liberals have left on the table. If they had they could have an extra $500,000 right now in the bank if they had just asked some voters or some registrants to pay $5. But we'll see if that changes. Anyway, still seems like Mark Carney's the front runner. I haven't seen any reason to doubt this. Any other thoughts on the race, or should we move on?
Well, we had the indications that Abacus data will probably field in the next few days for the Toronto Star, and also Main Street Research signaled that they would poll for the leadership race and separate Liberal supporters and actual Liberal registrants. So looking forward to that in a few days to see if we have better indications. But let's recall, we had that Léger poll that showed among Liberal supporters a 40-point lead for Mark Carney. You have to think that he's leading by a big margin right now, unless the ground game is faltering. But so more on this to come in February, I'm sure.
Also coming in February, Ontario election. So let's get to some of those numbers. We've had quite a bit of polls published over the last week, and they all kind of show the same thing. There's some differences in terms of the size of the PC lead, but all of them have them above the 40.8% of the vote the PCs got last time, so anywhere from 42 to 50. Yeah. The polls have the Liberals more or less where they were last time. Last time they got about 24%. The polls have them somewhere between 23 and 29. And for the NDP, they're somewhere between 17 and 21. So that is quite a bit of a drop from where they were last time. Finally, the Greens, somewhere from 3 to 9%. So, the general portrait is PC's doing better than last time. Liberals may be doing better than last time, but definitely in second. The NDP down in third, and the Greens not really making much headway.
Yeah, this is a tough campaign right now for the NDP, and I'm not talking about the ground. I'm talking about the numbers because we regularly saw NDP numbers around 25%. I looked at the list of all the polls in Ontario pre-writ, and it seems that there's been movement downwards for the NDP. And at some point, we'll have to wonder, is the federal NDP hurting the provincial NDP in Ontario? Because we've seen the same downward trend for the federal NDP in the province. And we know It's not entirely correlated, but it's also not completely, detached from one another. There's always a little brand confusion. About the OLP, the thing is, they had 24% of the vote, as you said, in 2022, and only won 8 seats because of vote efficiency was not there. But the modeling that we had back then showed that if the Liberals had gone up to maybe 27 or 28, just a handful of points, they could have doubled or even tripled their seat count. The thing is, this is still in danger because the PCs are not at 41 anymore. They're at 45 and sometimes 50. So even with a better performance for the Liberals, for the OLP, they could still be battling that 12-seat threshold. Right now I have them under the 12-seat threshold on average. But we'll see where the PC numbers land as we get closer. There's still debate to go. There's still, 3 weeks? 3 weeks today. Yeah, 3 weeks today to go. But that NDP number, you have to be a bit worried to lose the official opposition if you're the NDP, right?
Yeah. They still are in the running for it, though.
Oh, yeah.
Because their vote is much more efficient than the Liberals, because all the places that the Liberals are doing well tend to also be where the PCs are doing pretty well.
Yeah.
So they are still in danger of having a lot of second-place finishes.
Yeah.
And I think that is still an open question of whether they can actually win any of the seats, because they could pick up some seats from the NDP in Toronto, and that's about it. But outside of that, it's going to be hard to pick up in the GTA when the PCs are at 50% in the GTA.
Exactly.
So that race for second is still very much up for grabs, though the Liberals are clearly in second in terms of voting intentions, and will probably finish second in the popular vote. But that race for the second place in the seats is still up for grabs. But
distant second,
Is the campaign changing with the pause of the tariffs, with the hot mic moment that Doug Ford had? When he mentioned that he was happy that Donald Trump won the election, but then he effing yanked it in him, or the knife, or whatever he said afterwards. This is a family podcast, so I don't know. Do you think that anything has changed? Do you think that anything has changed over the last week?
You know what? I do not think so. I think, again, many conservative voters in this country and in Ontario, when push comes to shove, they fall in line. Thing is, the campaign began and we saw several numbers for the OLP at 30% or more. We don't see that anymore. The best are at 28 and 29, and again, that vote efficiency line, that slope for the Liberals is so steep in the high 20s that if they get 27 instead of getting 30, that could cost them 25 seats. So we'll keep following this, but as you said, the thing is, everything in the southwest of Ontario is just a desert for the Liberals. And so the road for the Liberals to at least become a little bit competitive has to be Toronto in the GTA, and they're leading in neither right now in the average. They're not leading in Toronto. They're competitive. They have good numbers in the mid-30s. And the GTA, they seem to be getting crushed by the Doug Ford Conservatives. So where else will they win seat? In the North, that's a handful, and I don't think they're that competitive in the North. Then you get Ottawa. Again, that's a handful of seats at most. So, as you said, the OLP maybe is looking at a ton of second-place finishes.
Yeah. Let's finish on the Quebec poll, the Léger poll, because there were some provincial numbers out of it. And so what they had was 30% for the Parti Québécois, 21% for the CAQ, 21% for the Quebec Liberals, 14% for the Conservatives, and 10% for Quebec Solidaire. This is the same poll that had the strong numbers for the federal Liberals, so I do wonder if that high PLQ number might be a bit of a boost that they've gotten from the federal Liberals, because, I don't know, has the Quebec Liberal leadership race even registered? I mean, the only thing I've seen about it is that Denis Coderre might not actually finish as a candidate. But what are your thoughts when you saw these numbers?
Okay, so I put the Liberal number to the side for the exact same reason as you said. They are at the Liberals, the Quebec Liberals, at 9% among Francophones. This is 5th place. This is really bad. But if you look coldly at the numbers, I went through all the polls, the Léger polls in Quebec throughout 2024. we've seen numbers among francophones as low as 4% for the Liberals, and the latest one was 7%. So if you go up to 9%, it's notable. But
if these trends continue,
if
they keep doubling.
Si la tendance se maintient. But so right now, I will update the Quebec projection this afternoon. So for those interested, go look it up. I will publish it in L'Actualité and on the main website. You'll see the Quebec Liberals firmly in second place in terms of seats. But the ceiling for the Quebec Liberals is really low because they're still not very popular among francophones. But for the CAQ, we said the uncertainty and the threat from south of the border could help the incumbent. It's not working here. François Legault has not been, he lost 3 points since the previous Léger poll. And for the Parti québécois, 30% is lower than the average of 2024, but it's still a 9-point lead. And also it matches the number we see for sovereignty. Now, this is the worst poll for sovereignty in 6 years. 29% in favor of sovereignty. And I think it was, you remember, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, we discussed the bad poll for sovereignty. And I said, well, the yes option went down, but the no option didn't go up. It was the undecided that grew. Well, in this poll, 59% against sovereignty. So it really went up. So the uncertainty is still the kryptonite of the sovereignty movement. People feel worried about the future, the economic future. Maybe they hold their horses on sovereignty, but still, 29%. It's a solid core. It's just not enough to win.
Yeah, and I think that will. Well, I think it will impact the discussion in the next federal campaign if sovereignty is now closer to 30 than to 40, and it could take a little bit of pressure off, I suppose, Pierre Poilievre, because there was discussion about when it looked like the Conservatives were going to sweep and win a landslide victory, and that the PQ is going to win easily in Quebec, which they still would with these numbers. Yeah. Then would start a referendum campaign. Maybe not as much of a top-of-mind issue, even in Quebec, based on these kinds of numbers and what's been happening south of the border. So maybe it takes that little debate off the table. And also, with the kind of numbers we've seen, no longer really likely that the Bloc Québécois wins the official opposition role, again, takes that a bit off the table. So we were heading towards like Quebec all the time almost, for the next couple of years. Now it is probably going to be Donald Trump all the time. I think that's what these numbers suggest.
I'd like to, before we get off the subject, we should mention this is the worst poll for Quebec Solidaire since just before the 2022 election. 10% for Quebec Solidaire. They would suffer massive losses. They would be wiped out of Quebec City. They would lose many seats in Montreal. A handful of seats in Montreal. And we don't have local numbers for Sherbrooke, but it would have to be in consideration that they could lose Sherbrooke. Quebec Solidaire at 10%. And also, the Quebec Conservatives, Eric, holding strong, no representation in the National Assembly, they're 14%. But if you look at the regional numbers from Léger in this poll, and it's, the Quebec City sample, I think, I don't have it in front of me, but I remember it was like a 250 cases. So it's uncertain, but the PCQ was at 30%. Parti Québécois in first place at 33%, PCQ Conservatives at 30%, and then the CAQ in third place. So la capitale nationale could potentially be the theater of a Parti Québécois versus Conservative race. And just by the way, neither of these parties won any seat in Quebec City last election, right? So, I've been asked by observers that know a little less about Quebec. They say, it seems that Quebec sometimes goes into these mood swings electorally. Like, you cannot take the vote for granted in Quebec. It can turn on a dime. The two parties that did not win any seats in Quebec City are the front runners right now, a year and a half before the election. So I wanted to mention that the Liberal number, we'll see if it's sustained. We'll see if the leadership race helps, but right now it's being completely overshadowed, right? But it ends in June, so they have time. Did you have any more comments, Eric, about this Quebec poll?
No, I think we'll see. I was wondering if François Legault was going to get any kind of bump at all. He's been trying to He's been trying to milk a little bit the stuff with the tariffs. They came out with this new integration plan for immigrants. You could imagine that they are setting some pieces into place for maybe that early call if they wanted to try to replicate Doug Ford's success in Ontario. But so far, I don't think there's much incentive for them to face the voters anytime soon.
They're third in Quebec City. They're trailing the PQ in the suburbs of Montreal, 12 points behind the PQ among francophones. They would need a big boost, and the last week has not provided that boost that they needed. So,
all right, I think you said you have a tiny little quiz.
well, it's a tiny little quiz.
Quizlet.
So Quizlet, yes. So I was in Ottawa 10 days ago. The Politico team, and you know I freelance for Politico Ottawa, and they held the first leg of the Politico Trivia Cup. And I figured, you know what? I took one of the sheets from that evening, and I figured I was going to test it on you. I don't think it's that hard for for somebody who knows so much about Canadian elections as you, but it's just 5 trivia questions about prime ministers, so federally. Okay. Gold is 5, silver is 4, bronze is 3, and big time shame if you get less than 3 on this, because I think you know these answers. Well, at least 4 of them. There's one that's difficult. Okay, here we go. Number 1, Eric. Who was the most recent prime minister elected in January?
Elected in January? Like a January election?
Yes.
Oh, well, this is Stephen Harper.
It is Stephen Harper.
Okay.
That evening was held in January. That's why they were asked.
Okay.
So, okay.
Sometimes when it's very simple, I feel like there must be some catch. There must be some little wrinkle that's trying to catch me.
Well, I didn't write this one. This is Nick Taylor-Vacy of Politico, which you should follow. He's awesome. Okay, number 2. Which prime minister lived at Harrington Lake for their entire term?
Lived. Harper lived at 24 Sussex, so it wouldn't be that. This is a good question. I don't know, actually. I think King was Saint Laurent was the first, so I'm going to say it was... No, because King had his own place. I don't think it was King. I don't know. Mackenzie King, I guess.
I will give you a hint.
Okay.
It's in our lifetime.
Was it in our lifetime?
Well, in my lifetime, actually.
Kim Campbell?
Kim Campbell is the right answer.
Okay.
I figured I should give you a little bit. She was prime minister for June to October. That's what, 4 months? Yeah,
not a long time.
Okay. Number 3. Apropos of nothing. Who was the shortest serving prime minister?
Like physically?
This person lasted 68 days.
Oh, okay. I thought it was like who is physically the shortest prime minister.
Well, that would be interesting. I don't know if we have that data, though.
Yeah. The shortest. So I think that days. Would have been Charles Tupper.
And it was Charles Tupper. Okay. This was given with a multiple choice, but I figured you didn't need multiple choice. The choices were Charles Tupper, John Turner, or Joe Clark, and the answer is Charles.
Tupper came in 1896. He never got to sit in the House as Prime Minister. He was replacing Mackenzie Bole, and I think they dissolved the legislature pretty quickly after that, and then Wilfrid Laurier won that election. So it was a very short, tumultuous time for Charles Tupper. Tups, as I would like to call him.
Does that mean that Tupper and Turner are the only PMs to never sit in a house? They would have to be,
maybe.
Right?
I don't know if Campbell ever did. She came in June.
That's true. Okay. Oh, we'll look this up. All right, you got bronze locked up. Number 4. What is the Prime Minister's current salary? Now, this question was given as an over-under, but that's too easy. I will give you a plus or minus 25,000 range.
Okay. So the salary for an MP is somewhere around 160, if I'm not mistaken, and I think the salary for the PM is double that. So I think it's 325.
Is that your final answer?
Yeah, 325 is my final.
Well, right now it's 406,000.
Ooh,
So it is
nice
pretty
work if
good.
you can get it.
Yeah. So yeah. So you got this wrong. Now, to save silver, you have to get this one. Who is the fourth Prime Minister of Canada? And not the fourth to act as Prime Minister, but the fourth person.
Oh, okay. Well, MacDonald was first. Alexander Mackenzie was second. And then MacDonald came back, and then he died. And John Abbott took over from him, and so was John Thompson.
John Sparrow David Thompson is the correct answer. My friend, you got silver, and the only one you missed was the PM salary, which is not what we usually do. So you know what? I give you almost gold. Congratulations, Eric. Good work.
Thanks very much. John Thompson is one of our oddest prime ministers. He died at dinner with Queen Victoria.
Ooh.
He was visiting and died, and more or less died at the table. Also, there's a biography of him, and the biography includes his letters that he wrote to his wife.
Oh,
They're a little blue. Let's just put it that way. It's a little uncomfortable to read.
do you mean like you mean like X-rated or
a little bit? Yeah.
Really?
Victorian X-rated. Let's call it that way. It's a little ick. Anyway.
Well, I cannot wait to.
Okay, number of the week. What do you got?
I got 40%.
Ooh.
So in the Léger poll in Quebec again, the question was asked: who do you have more confidence to face Donald Trump? When we put Chrystia Freeland in there, it's 33% Freeland, 27 Poilievre. And when you put Mark Carney in there, it's 40% Mark Carney and 24 Priya Poilievre. And so, again, these numbers all seem to go into the same direction, that many Quebecers, even though they may not know him that much, seem to be liking the prospect of Mark Carney as a Liberal leader and Prime Minister. So I'm surprised by this. Again, I want more polling to confirm, but this is Léger. It's really hard to dismiss as just an outlier.
Okay, my number is going to be 50%. We've seen a couple of polls that have given the Ontario PCs 50%. Ipsos had a poll at 50. Relay Strategies had a poll at 50. No party has gotten that much of the vote. No single party in Ontario has gotten 50% of the vote since 1929 and Howard Ferguson.
God.
So it's been a long time. There's been a couple times where it's been very close, like 49 point something, but 50%, we haven't seen that in nearly a century. So on the one hand, it shows, wow, the PCs are doing really good. On the other hand, it shows maybe it'll be a tough bar to meet, but 50% is my number of the week. Just remarkable to see that kind of number in any poll in Ontario. Ontario is a pretty complicated place. So anyway, we'll see what's going to happen. So that'll be it for this week's episode of The Numbers. We're going to record our mailbag episode next. We got lots of questions about Ontario. We got some questions about Mark Carney, the federal leadership, and all this kind of stuff. So if you want to check that out, you can go to thenumberspod.ca. We put that out every week for our members of our Patreon. We also have our special episodes. Last week, the episode was our retrospective on the 1993 federal election, and that was a lot of fun. So again, you can go to thenumberspod.ca to check that out. Philippe, stuff's not stopping, so it's not going to stop, but I'm looking forward to when we can chat again in 7 days.
Absolutely. Merci beaucoup, Eric. Merci beaucoup, tout le monde. Head over to the mailbag right now.